Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Petra Slinkard. Petra serves as the chief curator and Nancy B. Putnam, curator of fashion and textiles at the Peabody Essex Museum. Together with Jackie Yoong from the Asian Civilisations Museum in Singapore, Petra was the guiding force behind the current outstanding exhibition entitled Andrew Ginn, Fashioning the World. During the program, we'll find out why and how the exhibition came about. We'll go on a behind the scenes tour and in the process come to better understand and appreciate the extraordinary designer Andrew Ginn and his exquisite craftsmanship, cross-cultural inspirations, and deep commitment to storytelling through design. Let's start by meeting Petra and then finding all about Andrew Ginn fashioning the world. Let's start by meeting Petra and then finding all about Andrew Ginn fashioning the world. Welcome, Petra. So delighted to be able to be here again.
Oh, Jay, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I appreciate the time and the interest in the exhibition.
Oh, I had the wonderful opportunity to visit and tour the exhibition a couple of weeks ago and was simply just blown away by the magnitude of his work and the colors, the way you've laid it out. Just exquisite, eager to find out so much more and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I think it would be of interest if you'd briefly share a little bit more about your background and professional interests, please.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, Jay, and I appreciate that. Making exhibitions is one of the highlights of my professional career, and certainly something that is a major driver and something that we really pride ourselves on at the Peabody Essex Museum. I've been with PEM for almost 8 years. I
Mm,
was hired and brought on board as the inaugural Nancy B. Putnam Curator of Fashion and Textiles. And then in 2020, I became the Director of Curatorial Affairs, and then this past summer, Chief Curator. So I've been working with a really dynamic team of individuals here, in addition to our Director and CEO, Linda Hardigan, on managing our exhibition program at large, working on growing our collection, in my case, particularly in the area of fashion and textiles, but really thinking globally about
mm,
fashion and textiles, particularly because PEM's collection is a global collection. And, prior to that, I worked at the Chicago History Museum, where our focus was more narrow in the sense that it
mm,
was on truly the history of the city as the oldest cultural institution in the city of Chicago, but
mm,
also quite broad and interesting because there are so many stories that a city like Chicago can share with us and
mhm.
visitors. And then prior to that, I was in Indianapolis at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, which is now called Newfields, working more in an encyclopedic way, but again in fashion and textiles.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, before we talk about the exhibition, for those maybe not that familiar with Andrew Ginn, would you start by sharing just a little bit about his background and why he's considered such a groundbreaking figure among Paris-based designers?
Well, thank you for that. So Andrew is an absolute delight, and I hope that you have the pleasure of meeting him sometime. He's an exuberant and effusive personality. And, I think what is very interesting about Andrew's career and, his personal trajectory is that, he started studying fashion in London and, really broke away from, I think maybe some of his familial expectations. I think his parents really wanted him to be a lawyer. And, fashion was always a part of him. He was exposed to textiles in particular as a young man, and as a child because his father was a textile merchant.
Ah.
He was born and raised in Singapore the year before the country experienced independence. And, so in this way, he, in my opinion, kind of personifies this um, growth of Singapore as this, mighty nation. And, he studied fashion in London at Central St. Martin's, was one of the first Asian students to be accepted and to graduate from that program.
Mhm.
Went on and did a cultural exchange in New York at Parsons, and he really attributes New York and that time in New York as being really formative. He spent a lot of time on the streets absorbing the retail culture in New York, and I think,
Mm.
in his own words, understanding how women on the move, women on the go, kind of a modern woman, wears clothes, and I feel like
Mm.
that actually see in his clothing design and in his philosophical approach to design. And then went on to study and apprentice in London, and then eventually made his way to Paris, where, in his own words, it was the epicenter. It is the epicenter of all things beautiful. The other thing that I would say about Andrew that I believe that really makes him stand out as a designer is that he truly designs from a position of joy.
Mm.
Um, he uses his clothes and his designs as a way to communicate that joy. Um, but they're really complex conceptually. You might look at an ensemble and think, oh, well, that's pretty. And yes, of course, on one plane, it is pretty.
Mhm.
But when you really start to unpack all of the stimuli and the inspiration that goes into those designs, to me, that's kind of where the power is, the power of both communication, but also the visual power, the nonverbal communication that occurs. And in part because I think Andrew approaches his designs from this really sort of inclusive perspective. And so just to go back to your original question for a moment, he was the first Singaporean designer to be invited almost immediately after founding his house to join the Federation of Haute Couture in Paris.
Mm.
Um, he started showing at Paris Fashion Week almost immediately and has never missed a show until the moment
Wow.
that he retired and closed his house. And so in that way, he really is a trailblazer as a Singaporean, as an individual of, mixed heritage background and thinking about incorporating Asian and Southeast Asian elements into high fashion, catering to a Western market and really in turn a global market is one of the ways in which he really stands out as a Parisian and also I think among his peers.
What inspired the Peabody, you and others to have this exhibition make its North American debut here?
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, PEM's collection is a global collection. PEM has been collecting since 1799.
Wow.
We're the oldest continually collecting and operating museum in the United States. And because of that, because of the way in which our collection formed and the intersections and the hybridity of design that represents so many different cultures coming together in regard to technique and to visual applications. The way in which Andrew designed, we felt was a really beautiful fit from a contemporary perspective. It bridges our Asian export art collection, of which Andrew is a major collector and an
Mm.
enthusiast and appreciator. It is a way to highlight Southeast Asia, looking at Singapore, but also looking at visual elements from Indonesia, from India, from Japan, from China. It's rich in ornamentation and embellishment. which I think really nods to our textile collection broadly, but also infuses elements of popular culture. And, PEM is really all about bridging the historic and the contemporary, the
Mhm.
then and the now. And we really felt that Andrew's work as a whole and his practice as a designer and as an artist represented those characters.
Can you start by sharing how the exhibition is organized, the different thematic sections that you thought it was important to structure the collections in?
Absolutely. So this first image is the introduction to the exhibition, and we wanted to anchor the exhibition with three really stellar pieces that
Mhm.
represent the breadth and the depth of his practice. And so the central figure is actually on loan to us, and I will note that of all the works in the gallery, of which there are over 100, um, the 95% of them are promised gifts to the Peabody Essex Museum from the House of Andrew Ginn. So
Mm.
these will become a part of our collection, which is just,
Oh.
an added bonus to being able to, safeguard and share this legacy for years to come. But the exhibition, as you noted also in the beginning, was in partnership with my colleague Jackie Yoong, who is the senior curator of design at the Asian Civilisations Museum. And we were able to borrow 11 ensembles from ACM to help augment our experience. And one of those pieces you see in the center, and that is that beautifully embellished cape
Mm.
with this gorgeous griffin illustrated across the ground of the cape. And I wanted to start with this because it did so many things for me, and represented so many different aspects of Andrew's approach. Not only is it highly ornamental, of course, it is
Mm.
embellished in, hand sewn gold sequins in this really illustrative and graphic way, showcasing this griffin. The cape itself, sort of draws on fashion history, particularly like easy ecclesiastical garments, thinking about
Mhm.
a cope and that cape silhouette. But then there's also this subtle play that occurs. So you have something that is so grand and so luxurious, and then he pairs them with a pair of very simple woolen shorts. And so like that kind of, playful juxtaposition I thought really spoke to Andrew's work and his approach. And then there's also the element of narrative, which is so important to Andrew's collections and the way in which he designs. And in this particular case, he was, reminiscing on mythology and thinking about, stories that he had read as a young man. And, that griffin is the image that was really conjured in his mind in this particular collection. And so we ground visitors here to introduce them to Andrew Ginn, who he is as an individual, and also who is his house? What is his house? What does it stand for? And what is its reach in the terms of fashioning the world? And so we speak briefly about the fact that he's been designing for almost 30 years. He produced 80 collections and almost 10,000 pieces. And that,
Incredible.
I know, right? And he's drawing on all of these elements that bridge, as I said, pop culture, cultural history, literature history, film, and art. And that all of these things come together, distilled through this very refined lens. And then the third element is that the cape that you see is actually one of three that exist in the world. So
Wow.
there's a rarity to his approach. And while he is not working in haute couture, he is working in demi couture, and at the highest level of ready to wear that is possible coming out of Paris. And so that's really what this first section is intended to do, is to provide that broad overview.
Wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. In the time remaining, the next interesting to hear the overview that you provided with the different themes. And we're
Sure.
fortunate to have a selection of wonderful wide shots that we'll be showing. And as we do that, a little bit about your thinking and others of how it's structured and what the different themes represent.
My pleasure. Yes. And so the exhibition is really intended to almost act like an accordion, if you will. So there are
Hmm.
moments where it's a little more intimate and you see, maybe three pieces as you just did in the introduction, and then it expands out and then it comes back in a more intimate view and expands out again. And so as I mentioned, the introduction was a way to ground visitors as to who Andrew is and to sort of welcome them into the House of Andrew Ginn. And that's really
Mhm.
what the second section is intended to do, titled Meet Me in Paris. It not only talks about Andrew's approach and a little bit about his background in fashion design and his training, but it also looks at three pieces. One in the center that I'll speak to specifically, which is actually the represents his last collection. So in the 28 years that he was designing this last collection called Promised Land, was not only an ode to Paris, the city that he absolutely loved and that provided, boundless inspiration. But it also spoke to the notion of immigration and migrant history. And so it spoke to his own father's immigration from China into Singapore, Andrew's own immigration from Singapore into Paris, and really sort of speaks to all of these elements. But then there's also this celebrity factor and this pop culture factor because this
Mm,
ensemble was worn and in the hit particularly from a fashion perspective, television show Emily in Paris. And so, it
mm,
kind of provides different entry points for all visitors. You see this sort of, the next gallery talks about his more I think, expansive approach
mm,
to creating these ensembles, but specifically through the lens, as I said, of art history and literature and film. And so you see, groupings of ensembles that represent collections that were inspired by Gustav Klimt or
mm,
Monet, or looking at films that he was inspired by with stars like Elizabeth Taylor. But this also is fashioned in such a way to represent a runway. And so at the far end, visitors have the opportunity to see all of these clothes in motion on models. And have the opportunity to sort of sit in a chair and sort of act as if they might be at a runway show and have that experience because the runway was so important to the way in which Andrew presented his clothing.
Oh, it's such an incredible additional feature, which all the outstanding exhibitions, as this one models at PAM, have that go beyond just the displays like this, but enjoying, speaking myself, sitting down, enjoying the fashion show, seeing these incredibly exquisite designs. Again, I was totally overwhelmed by each piece. I mean, it just builds and builds and builds sort of to a crescendo at the end. It's so I can't wait to go back to see them again. But for the sake of our time, we're going to continue, and
Sure.
we're just
Lead the
giving
way.
viewers a little taste of what they can experience.
Yes. So as I said, we narrow back in and kind of toggle back and forth between the house and the man. And in this section, we look at a little bit more in depth at Singapore as a place that really fed his creativity. Obviously was part of his formative years, but also looks at the way in which he was raised. As I said, his father was a textile merchant. His parents were collectors and enthusiasts of art history, particularly of Asian export art, which was a a passion that they instilled in him, and I think kind of grew his eye. And you start to see that in these collections. The four in the center represent some of the earliest works in the collection, and were showcased at the Lincoln Center during an exhibition called China Chic from 2003. And so it's nice to be able to see early works that are a little bit more rooted in kind of streetwear, if you will. And
Mm.
you start to see his own evolution as a designer from these four in this early collection as it broadens out through the exhibition as a whole.
Fabulous, fabulous. And what do we,
Nature is a perennial source of inspiration for Andrew, and we really see that in this gallery as well. Not only his excellent use of color, you mentioned yourself, Jay, that he loves color. There is a vibrancy to all of these
mm,
clothes, and that is rooted in the fact that he is a master colorist. And that he does draw a lot of inspiration from floral arrangements, from butterflies, from coral, which you see here in the center. Having grown up at a port city, he partnered with the Australian Great Barrier Reef Foundation in an effort to draw attention
mm.
to the dying coral reefs. So always looking at and as I said, sort of analyzing all of those various layers to many of these ensembles.
I mean, even the images jump out at you, but don't do anywhere near the justice of seeing them in person. Just incredible. Let's continue and enjoy a few more during our time.
Thank you. So this is nearing the end of the exhibition, and this is really thinking about like a life well traveled. He went and visited Japan on multiple occasions, and you see this lovely display of ensembles sort of on that staircase leading up in the back of the wall. You see this fabulous gown in the foreground,
Mhm.
which was drawn on his imagination. He found a Life magazine from the 1950s that featured Queen Elizabeth on her visit to India, and taking and drawing all of these various elements. But I appreciate that you said that the works really need to be experienced in person because there is so much
Wow.
detail and so much layering in these ensembles that I agree with you to see them in true form with the naked eye, does have an impact. And you'll also note the accessories in all of these ensembles. He
Mm.
truly designs a complete look. And so we went to great lengths to be sure that all of the accessories were included as he would have intended them to be.
And in addition to, say, the runway example, just different video stations as well, one featuring Andrew himself uh, sharing his thoughts with viewers is just an additional bonus in addition to the
Yes, no, thank you for
fashions.
bringing that up. We try to include the artist's voice whenever possible. And so in addition to the interview that you have, we incorporated lots of quotes by Andrew as well in an effort to try to provide visitors with an opportunity to really understand from his perspective what he was attempting to do, what he was inspired by, and how he was affected by it.
Mhm. Well, a couple of more wonderful shots.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you included this one. This is another loan to us from ACM. This is a really wonderful piece.
Mm,
That feathered cape is comprised entirely of gold sequins. It's a spectacular piece in person, but it also, I think, speaks to another element of Andrew's design, which is that these are all very visually impactful clothes, and yet they're also very comfortable to wear.
mm,
Comfort and ease of wear is very important to Andrew. Many of his clothes, like his predecessors like Halston and Pauline Trégère, he focuses on an ease of design. So there are rarely any understructure. It's usually one zipper, maybe a hook and eye, but simplicity is really the king here. And in this section, I love the quote that we used that was offered by Andrew, and that is that if you don't see beauty, you don't see the future.
mm.
And I appreciate that, he has always designed from a perspective of positivity and a perspective of celebrating joy and celebrating beauty and wanting to share that.
And there's
Oh,
just
yes. And then these are some great celebrity pieces, all completely hand embroidered with beading. Some of them weigh quite a bit, actually. But this is an opportunity for us to showcase and highlight some of his evening wear, but also to speak briefly about, the women of the world, the women of note, who have sought Andrew out when they want to look their best. And again, kind of speaking to that ease of wear coupled with the impact of the clothes.
what do you hope audiences take away both from Andrew Ginn and his fashion and beyond?
Well, so many things. I hope that visitors develop an appreciation for his artistry. I hope that visitors are inspired to learn a little bit more about Singapore and kind of understand the cultural cross currents that are occurring there historically and contemporarily. I hope that people are inspired to learn a little bit more about artisanship and craftsmanship. Andrew really partnered with some really fantastic um, family houses in Italy and in France that are doing are doing artisanship at such a high level,
Mm,
but those skills are starting to die out. And, those houses, those family firms are starting to die out because there isn't the structure in place to support them. And then also, I think just from a more broad perspective, that inspiration can come from anywhere, and that vision and intentionality is really important in design. And I think staying true to yourself as an artist, which I believe that Andrew absolutely always did, which is why I think, he was successful through all of these years.
mhm. In closing, how do you think his legacy will influence the next generation of designers?
That's a great question. I hope that his legacy influences the next generation by providing an opportunity for people to truly think about fashion as a global
Mm,
language. And also, I think as a designer who made it on his own terms, to inspire people to be true to themselves and to uphold a value system that speaks to artistry. There were stumbles, of course, and there were hardships, of course, because it would be impossible to succeed without them. Um, but he and his business partner maintained their independence.
mm.
And I think that as artisans working in the fashion industry today, that's extremely difficult. And I think that that is absolutely a part of their legacy.
Wonderful, wonderful. And in closing, just a quick word. There's a wonderful book that accompanies the exhibition. Just a brief word about what visitors can experience from that type of purchase.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so there are a few essays in the book. One from me on his impact in the American market. There's a great interview with the designer himself and a couple
Mm,
of other essays written by our colleagues in Singapore. A little bit about, his upbringing, but also much of what he is drawing inspiration from and a different point of view and context there. And then we included runway images of models wearing all the clothes in Pam's collection. So again, an opportunity for visitors to see the clothes in a different kind of motion. It's still static because it's photography, but as much motion as we can provide because the clothes deserve to move. And I think that that's really when they're seen at their best.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, unfortunately, Petra, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be here, providing the wonderful background insight, your thinking in putting on the exhibition, Andrew's thinking of his incredible creations, and just want to wish you and others at the PEM continued success with future endeavors and definitely encourage viewers and others lots of time until mid-February to visit the Andrew Ginn exhibition.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for the time again. And yes, we welcome you all to come and visit.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.